the world has changed. The media has changed, and Joe Rogan, the man sitting at the top of like this sphere of influence, is now officially mainstream media. And I wanted to talk about that because I just saw this stat recently, looking, comparing viewership between Joe Rogan and mainstream media outlets like CNN. And Joe Rogan gets 28 times the viewership of CNN. 28 times. Now, over the past decade or two, we've had this idea that the mainstream media, and by mainstream I mean the media that most people watch, the mainstream of people watch. It's been like, I don't know, CNN, Fox, New York Times, Washington Post, all of the TV and video channels that came from like centralized media, and like big corporate stuff, where big billionaires were involved in getting stories out into your eyeballs. That is over. The mainstream media is the guy who gets the most views, which is currently Joe Rogan, and then the various other people who are very popular on social media platforms. And the election in 2024 basically sealed this case. If you go back into my old videos, I have long been saying that the mainstream media is dead, and I've noticed that as a reporter that it's harder to get stories approved and whatnot, and that's why I came on to YouTube and Substack and various places. But now there's like a geopolitical, major macroeconomic shift that has happened. And I want to just think about that for a moment and what that means to information in our future. One of the problems with Joe Rogan who is the top influencer in the world, we can all agree that he is the top, pundit out there by views and watch time. And a lot of people say, and I actually don't like hate everything Joe Rogan does. I actually found his Burn the Boat special on Netflix actually sort of funny, and he made some really good points, which, I'm not going to go into like too much of his content and the way he platforms a bunch of different people, but more the fact that he does platform people. Like in general, the idea that he gives a guest 3 hours to talk about whatever it is they talk about. Now, in the old mainstream media world, if you go back to 2010, a person would be scrolling through the internet and they would go to, say, the New York Times, and they would look at the headline and there would be two stories up the top, or maybe there's one big story up at the top, and they'd scroll down and they'd see like 15 or 20 stories. In the course of 15 minutes, you get a pretty good idea of what's going on that day. That was how mainstream media worked. And maybe you turn on CNN or you turn on Fox News, and they cover a whole bunch of stories. And like the evening news was a half an hour long. In the current universe, the way people are consuming media, it's these intensely long podcasts and video segments that can go on for 3 hours. And I want to look at or just highlight that our consumption patterns of information have changed very severely. Now, if you are a Joe Rogan fan, and this isn't like his fault, this is just the reality that is out there. Someone who really likes Joe Rogan will turn on the Joe Rogan channel, and they'll have Joe Rogan on in the background for a significant portion of the day. I mean, does he put 2 or 3 episodes out a week? I should actually probably look at that. But let's say it's only 2. And so he's putting out 6 hours of content that a large number of people consume in its entirety, and then in segmented clips that get fed to you through the algorithm. That is a lot of brain space that's being devoted to whatever single story that Joe Rogan has come out. And what I want to point out here is that we are in the popularity of that sort of influencer has created an information desert for people to seek out a diversity of opinions. Now, Joe Rogan does have a variety of guests on his podcast. He'll have scientists, he'll have like sort of crackpots, and then he'll have like some really serious people. And he actually does ask some interesting questions. And I'm not saying that there's no value to Joe Rogan's interviews. There are sometimes value. There's sometimes some terrible things on there, but it doesn't matter. It's the fact that Joe Rogan is curating a single person is curating this feed, and that hundreds of millions of people are spending their brain time on that. And there's only 24 hours in a day. So if you have 6 hours devoted to Joe Rogan in your life, how much are you devoting to a diversity of other types of information? Like how much are you doing to Fox News? How much is going to CNN? How much is going to podcasters like me? Like how much is going out to other sources of information? And I think that this information desert is really what is the most important takeaway for the current media environment that we're in right now. Even if you love Joe Rogan, you should understand that without a diversity of viewpoints, and it's not his fault that people love his content, right? You know, I guess it's he's responsible for his content being engaging and people liking it. But the fact that people are no longer engaging at a societal level with a whole bunch of different things, and are going and are being fed by algorithms and the various network of social influencers, the fact that they're listening to Joe Rogan, and you have a certain number of hours of a week that you're going to acquire new information, that in and of itself is a problem, and it's indicative of the new media environment that we're going to live in going forward. Like the old mainstream outlets, the big ones. For Noam Chomsky wrote this book called Manufacturing Consent a few decades ago, and the gist of it is the gist that you already know. The media that you consume is controlled by billionaires, right? And those billionaires use their influence to frame the conversation. And alter the world that the way you see information in the world. And that was a very compelling view, especially when the means of production and the means of distribution were centralized in just a few power players who could afford to do that. In the current world, with the true democratization of internet information, we're now in a different place, right? We're in a place where its influence and the great thumbnail design and the parasocial relationship that people create with creators, right? And they think that they feel that they're friends with Joe Rogan, and you're not. If you listen to Joe Rogan, you're not friends with him, but you like his vibe. But there's a feeling of connection with the type of person that Joe Rogan is, and other influences are. That is extremely different than the world that existed just a few years ago. And I think we need to recognize that when we talk about mainstream media from today going forward, and probably honestly 2 years ago, 3 years ago going forward, mainstream media is Joe Rogan, is social media, is the sort of content that you're consuming now. How that plays out down the line, I mean, there are good things and there are bad things about this new distribution model, this new distribution structure. But we have to recognize that the rules have changed, and that has to let us reevaluate what we're doing on these platforms. I do not think that we can deploy that Noam Chomsky manufacturing consent idea anymore. That it's all these big players controlling the little information. Now it's the social media influencers and the algorithms that feed information that are framing the way that we understand and consume the world. I can probably talk about this a lot more, and I'm actually working on a couple videos that go into sort of more depth on my main channel. This is my back channel. My back channel is where I can just sort of chat about things off the top of my head, and it's not quite as structured. These are very much opinion pieces. On my main channel, I have interviews and reported pieces, and I'm working on a really big reported piece about a major influencer right now, and how the contradictions in their personalities, their contradictions of their statements and their personalities frame the medical and scientific advice that comes out in the world. And there is a component of how money influences people. But if you look at the money that exists on social media platforms, the big sponsors are not like McDonald's and Coca-Cola, at least not right now. I mean, they could be soon. the big sponsors are like AG1 and things on subscription models and VPNs and the other like BetterHelp, like these sorts of like, they're not big media, they're not the big global conglomerates. It's not Monsanto and Unilever controlling the message. It's actually these lower tier influencers. It understanding how those economics change the words that you and the messages and the information you get is going to be a very critical part of some of the things that I do on this channel. So anyway, that's all heads up. Thank you for coming to my back channel. I really appreciate you coming here. This is very different stuff than what I do on my main channel. And, I appreciate the open conversation that we can have. Thanks.